Viewer discretion advised. The following video contains graphic content and depictions of heinous crimes. In the early 1990s, Australia was rocked by the horrific backpacker murders, took place in Belanglo State Forest, claiming the lives of 7 innocent backpackers. This series of killings remains one of the most heinous and infamous in the country's history. The man responsible for these brutal acts, Ivan Milat, has consistently proclaimed his innocence despite his documented history of violence. Milat's involvement in criminal activities began to surface early in his life. By the age of 13, local authorities were already aware of his troubling behavior. At just 19 years old, he had already been convicted as a thief. It was only a matter of time before he would go on to become known as the notorious backpacker murderer. Welcome to InsightWave, the channel that delves into both solved and unsolved cases from around the world. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest crime stories delivered straight to your inbox. Ivan Milat's upbringing was marked by a dysfunctional family, a common characteristic among many serial killers. Born on December 27, 1944, in Guildford, Australia, Ivan Robert Marko Milat came from a financially disadvantaged Croatian immigrant family. His father displayed a propensity for violence, while his mother frequently found herself pregnant. With a total of 14 children, Milat was the 5th among his siblings, and sadly, 2 of his brothers died. The Milat family resided in a cramped shack in Moorebank, a suburb on the outskirts of Sydney, Australia. While the siblings attended private Catholic schools, they often engaged in mischievous activities after class. They became accustomed to handling knives and firearms, spending their afternoons shooting targets in their parents' yard. Milat's rebellious behavior had already caught the attention of authorities by the tender age of 13. As time went on, Milat's criminal activities escalated. At 17, he found himself in a juvenile detention center due to theft, and by 19, he had committed a break-in at a local store. At the age of 17, Ivan Milat purportedly confessed to one of his brothers about a botched stick-up where he accidentally shot a taxi driver, leaving the man paralyzed from the waist down. Milat managed to elude capture, and an innocent man was subsequently wrongfully convicted, serving 5 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. On Friday, April 9, 1971, at the age of 26, Milat set off on a disturbing quest in his beloved Falcon V8, boasting 250 horsepower. His intentions were clear: he was hunting for unsuspecting hitchhikers. In Liverpool, he came across 2 18-year-old girls seeking a ride to Melbourne. Both young women were undergoing psychiatric treatment and were under the influence of Valium. As the girls drifted off to sleep, they awoke to find themselves on a desolate dirt road. Milat menacingly brandished knives, informing them of his intention to have sex with both of them. He brazenly declared, "You know what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill you. Will you not scream when I slit your throats?" Subsequently, Milat bound their hands and feet tightly with nylon cord, proceeding to sexually assault one of the girls in the front seat. However, their ordeal came to an unexpected end when Milat stopped at a gas station to purchase some fizzy drinks for them, allowing both girls to escape. This chilling episode raises questions about whether it served as a distorted dress rehearsal for the horrifying acts that would unfold in the years to come. Alternatively, it could be seen as a regular yet unreported pastime for a man who had already spent 5 years incarcerated, starting from the age of 17. Ivan was introduced to his future wife Karen in October 1975. It was a time of apparent stability in his life. He had 5 jobs in 18 years and all his bosses described him as the ideal employee. Although their relationship was turbulent, Ivan and Karen appeared happy together and they were married in 1984. But then, in 1987, Karen walked out on her husband. On July 13, 1989 they were divorced. 6 months the first 2 backpackers went missing. For a period of 2.5 years, between January 1990 and April 1992, Milat became a ruthless, cold-blooded and sadistic killer who scoured the Hume Highway looking for victims. Then the murders stopped just as suddenly as they begun. The crimes for which Milat served his sentence began in December 1989. The day before New Year's Eve, Deborah Everest and James Gibson, from Melbourne, embarked on a journey from Sydney to Albury near the border of New South Wales and Victoria, to attend Confeast. When neither made contact with family in the weeks following, their relatives filed a missing persons report. Police were not immediately concerned. Young people, traveling to a festival can stop communicating from time to time, especially in 1989, when mobile phones were not a thing yet. The subsequent 5 victims followed similar routes. Simone Schmidl, a 21-year-old from Germany, departed from Sydney to Melbourne on January 20, 1991. She had arranged to reunite with her mother at Melbourne Airport 4 days later, but she never arrived. On Boxing Day 1991, Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anja Habschied, 20, also German, left Sydney with the intention of embarking on a 4,000-kilometre journey to Darwin before returning to Munich a month later. However, they never boarded their flight. Clark, 21, from Surrey, and Walters, 22, from Maesteg in Wales, initially met at a backpackers' hostel in Sydney's King's Cross and later shared an apartment there. They had hitchhiked together multiple times in Australia, including trips to the small town of Mildura in Victoria and a journey to Tasmania for fruit picking. In April 1992, they departed Sydney once again, with loose plans that potentially involved travelling south to Victoria or heading west to Perth in Western Australia. As weeks passed without any communication with their families, both sets of parents took action, notifying authorities in the United Kingdom and Australia and utilising the media to generate interest in the case. Journalists quickly began to connect their disappearance with other similar instances. In April 1992, an Australian television program documented the search efforts of Neugebauer's parents, shedding light on additional missing backpacker cases. The first victims connected to Ivan Milat came to light on September 19, 1992, when they were found in the Belanglo State Forest in New South Wales. While out for a run, 2 individuals stumbled upon a concealed body lying face down in the soil, with its hands bound behind its back. The next day, law enforcement uncovered another body merely 98 feet away from the initial one. Through dental records, the deceased were identified as British backpackers Caroline Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22, who had last been seen several months earlier in April. The results of the autopsies revealed the horrific nature of their deaths. Clark had been blindfolded and taken into the bush, where she was subjected to 10 gunshots to the head, indicating that her body had been used for target practice. On the other hand, Walters had suffered a brutal stabbing. She had sustained 14 wounds, including 4 to the chest, 1 to the neck, and 9 to the back, severing her spinal cord. Given the suspicion that more bodies might be concealed within the forest, investigators conducted an extensive search of the area. However, their efforts did not yield any further discoveries at that particular time. Nonetheless, their instincts proved accurate, as additional corpses would later be uncovered in the subsequent year. In October 1993, a chilling discovery was made by a local man who was searching for firewood in a secluded part of the Belanglo State Forest. Within the wilderness, human bones were found, prompting the man to immediately notify the police. Acting swiftly, authorities uncovered 2 bodies that were later identified as Deborah Everest, 19, and James Gibson, 19, the young couple who had disappeared in 1989. Gibson was found in a curled-up position, bearing multiple deep stab wounds that had severed his spine and punctured his lungs. Everest, on the other hand, had suffered a brutal assault, including head injuries resulting in a fractured skull and broken jaw, along with a single stab wound to her back. The perplexing aspect was that their bodies were discovered in a location that baffled the police, as their belongings had been found 75 miles north in December 1989. The subsequent month, during a thorough police sweep, a skeleton was found in a clearing along a fire trail within the forest. The remains were later identified as those of Simone Schmidl, 21, a German backpacker who had been reported missing. Similar to the previous victims, Schmidl had endured deep stab wounds that severed her spine. Continuing their search along a nearby fire trail, investigators made another grim discovery. The bodies of Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anja Habschied, 20, both German travelers who had been missing for 2 years, were found. Habschied had been decapitated, with her skull never being recovered, while Neugebauer had suffered 6 gunshot wounds to the head. The level of brutality exhibited in these killings surpassed anything the local authorities had encountered before. The news was consumed by these horrifying events, earning the case the infamous moniker of the backpacker murders, highlighting the perpetrators' focus on targeting tourists who were hitchhiking through Australia. Clive Small, a retired detective from the New South Wales Police who led the investigation into these heinous crimes, reflects on the sinister nature of the murders, stating, "That demonstrates the malicious and vicious nature of the killings. The deaths were drawn out, and the fact that there were multiple deaths also indicates an increasing commitment to the murders." Between 1989 and 1992, the killer struck once a year, targeting young travelers, both male and female, who were seeking rides from strangers between Sydney and Melbourne. The intense media attention brought up previous cases involving the Milat brothers, known to possess firearms and residing near the Belanglo Forest, about an hour away. However, authorities lacked sufficient evidence to justify searching the Milat's property, where Ivan Milat still lived with his mother. Amidst numerous informants, a British man named Paul Onions, a former Navy member who had backpacked in Australia years before, came forward. He informed Australian investigators that a man had attempted to murder him during his travels, and he believed it was the same individual responsible for the other backpacker killings. The man, who called himself Bill, offered Onions a ride while he was hitchhiking along the highway. Onions grew suspicious when the driver deviated from the road. Eventually, the man stopped his car in a remote area far from the highway, revealing a gun and a rope. Realizing the danger, Onions decided to escape. He undid his seatbelt, jumped out of the vehicle, and ran, thinking it was a matter of life or death. The driver fired shots at Onions as he ran across the Hume Highway. Eventually, he managed to catch the attention of Joanne Berry, a woman driver, whom he desperately pleaded with for help. Berry assisted him in escaping. However, Onions' account and Berry's statement to the local police were dismissed and forgotten, until Onions saw news reports about the Belanglo backpacker murders. Australian authorities brought Onions from London to Sydney to identify the man who had attempted to kidnap and kill him. Out of a lineup of 13 suspects, Onions identified his would-be murderer as suspect number 4, Ivan Milat. Meanwhile, authorities made contact with the 2 women who had hitchhiked near the forest in 1977 and narrowly escaped being murdered by an unidentified man with unkempt black hair. After being shown a series of photographs, which included Ivan Milat and his brother Richard, one of the women identified the brothers. Taking into account Milat's previous rape charge involving 2 female backpackers in 1971, authorities believed they had found the backpacker killer. They placed surveillance on Milat's Sydney residence, which he shared with his sister Shirley Swar, who was suspected of being involved in the murders as well. According to the youngest Milat brother, George, Shirley was in on it. Although he couldn't definitively say that Shirley committed the murders, he acknowledged her involvement. Reports also indicated that Swar and Milat had engaged in a sexual relationship since the 1950s. The investigation culminated in a search of Milat's home on May 22, 1994. Armed police teams, clad in bulletproof vests, surrounded the premises while Milat reportedly laughed and mocked the lead negotiator, treating the situation as a joke. Once the police apprehended Ivan Milat, they conducted a thorough search of the property. They discovered a postcard from someone in New Zealand who referred to Milat as Bill, the same type of firearms cartridges and electrical tape found at some of the murder scenes, and Indonesian currency. While Milat had never been to Indonesia, two of his victims, Neugebauer and Habschied, had recently traveled there before coming to Australia. However, the most significant discovery was the collection of backpacking items and equipment found both inside the house and concealed within its walls. These items matched the belongings of several victims from the Belanglo Forest. It was described as an Aladdin's cave of evidence by one investigator. As investigators continued their search, a disconcerting thought entered their minds. Although the house was jointly owned by Ivan and his sister, the placement of Ivan's possessions, including weapons, ammunition, clothing, and other items linked to the backpacker murders, suggested that the house belonged solely to Ivan. This reinforced the assessment by forensic psychiatrist Rod Milton that control, possession, and domination were driving forces in Ivan's life. Following a lengthy trial, the backpacker murderer received 7 consecutive life sentences, one for each of Ivan Milat's victims discovered in Belanglo, along with an additional 6 years for the abduction of Paul Onions, without the possibility of parole. During his time in prison, Milat engaged in extreme actions such as writing to the NSW Supreme Court, the DNA Review Panel, and the Attorney General's office in an attempt to have his trial reviewed. He even resorted to cutting off his little finger with a plastic knife, intending to mail it to the High Court to force an appeal. On October 27, 2019, Ivan Milat passed away from natural causes.